So today we are going to have our second lecture on ER diagram. In the previous lecture, we have talked about entity instance, and this particular diagram has been used where we can see different types of entity. So entity could be strong, entity could be weak, entity could be associated. So strong entity, just giving you some idea why we need strong entity. Strong entity is some entity that can identify itself. Think about it. Student, can student identify itself? Can a student identify itself? What do you think about it? Any question, any answer? No answer? Are you there?
Repeat the question.
So the question is, can an entity identify itself? So the entity that can identify itself is known as strong entity. If so, my question was, can student identify student self? Can a student identify himself or herself?
Yes, sir.
How?
Yes.
How can you identify yourself? How do I know you are a student of IUB?
Sir, by giving my ID and saying that.
Okay, by giving your ID, that means you are saying your ID card or your ID number?
Sir, my ID card and my ID number both.
Yes, by your, exactly. So if I can have your ID card and if I have access to the system, I can verify you are a student of IUB or not, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Now, can you tell me, if you give me your name, can I verify whether you are a student of IUB or not?
No, sir.
It's difficult for you, sir, to identify.
Because
Sorry? Yes, can we identify if you are a student or not, if we have your name?
Sir, it would be difficult to just see the name and find it if I'm a student of IB or not.
Sir, if you have access to the system, you can. Yes.
No, if you even though if you have a system, if you have access to the system, can you say with the name that he is a student of, he or she is a student of IUB?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Because
If
for
it's
example,
the system,
name,
yes,
Mahdi
sir.
Hassan, with same name, there could be many Mahdi Hassan, right? So how do you know this guy is the guy that you are talking about?
Well, sir, in that case, it will be
Okay.
difficult. Yeah.
It's not possible to
Similarly,
identify.
Similarly, if we have given you the date of birth, can you identify the student with date of birth?
No,
No,
sir.
sir.
No, sir, no.
No, you can't. What about with gender?
No,
No,
sir.
sir.
Okay. So with which attribute you can identify the student?
ID.
Sir, only ID.
Only ID. So the attribute that can help student to any entity to identify itself is known as its primary key. So the key, the attribute which can help a student or an entity to identify itself would be known as its primary key. Make sense? So the entity that contain primary key is a strong entity. The entity that has a primary key is a strong entity. Now weak entity doesn't have any primary key. That's why they are weak. Okay, so weak entity, they don't have any primary key. Can you think of something like weak entity?
Sir, courses.
কোর্সের তো একটা আইডিয়া আছে না, CSC 303. So if you type CSC 303, you know what is the course, right?
Yes, sir.
Sir, name.
No. I am looking for an entity, not an attribute. I am looking for an entity, not an attribute. Name is an attribute, not entity. Okay, so no answer. Then let's proceed. We will get you the answer very soon. So here we are talking about attributes. Attributes are property or characteristics of the entity. As Asia or someone was saying, name as an entity. Do you think name would be an entity or name is an attribute? What do you think?
An attribute.
Sorry?
Yes, sir.
Name? Name is what?
It's an attribute, not entity.
Attribute. Name is not an entity. So attributes are characteristics of the entity or the relationship. So the attribute in a bigger sense, it could be of two types. One is required attribute, another is optional attribute. That means, for an example, someone might have mobile number, someone might not have any mobile number. So mobile number can be empty. So anything, any attribute that value is optional, then we consider that as an optional attribute, and the one that is required, we consider that is a required attribute. For an example, your name, your date of birth, these information sometimes in the system it is required, you must need to put those values. So those are known as required attribute. And some places where we can mention like, okay, if you don't provide me those information, it is fine, then those attributes should be known as optional attributes. Okay, so this is in generic, we can divide the attribute into two different segments. Another way of defining the attribute could be simple, atomic in nature, or attribute could be composite in nature. Think about it, your ID. How many component is there in your ID? Do you know about any component in the ID?
Year, semester, and country.
So ID is ID, right? ID is ID. Gender, think about gender, male or female. So how many components are there? Is there any components in the gender?
So two components,
Do you have
male
any
and female.
component? Sorry?
So two components, male and female.
In case of gender, what are the components? Do you have any component in gender? Gender is simple. It is an atomic value, either female or male. So there is no component in case of gender. Okay. So gender is a simple attribute. On the other hand, your name. Name is a composite attribute. Why it is a composite attribute? Because it consists of multiple parts, like first name, last name. So a name has multiple parts. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
Now think about it. Date of birth. What kind of data would be date of birth?
So it's also component because month, year.
Wait. I didn't mention what type of attribute. I said what type of data. What is the data type for date? Date of birth, the data type key. What is the data type of date of birth?
Sir, integer.
Sorry?
Data type, right? Sir,
Data type, right?
integer.
Integer. No,
String.
no, it is not integer. Date is not integer. Date of birth date কিভাবে integer হবে? How can you think date as an integer?
Sir, string.
String. If it is a string, then how can you compute age from date? Can you compute age from that means can you make any numerical calculation using a string? Can you do that? So there is a data type called date. Okay, there is a data type called date. Some places it is called date time. So that date or date time data is data type for date of birth. Make sense? বুঝতে পারছেন?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now if date of birth is basically date time data, then tell me, is it a simple attribute or composite attribute?
Sir, composite.
Why composite?
Because there are
Sir, you can
month.
year and date also.
Yes, but what are the components in dates? Date itself should contain all those things, isn't it? If a date contains everything, then how come you say this is a composite? Are you getting the point?
Yes, sir.
Have you done a date type of thing in C++? Have you defined any object called date which contain 3 types of integer
Yes,
in
sir.
these things? Have you done those things? So
Yes, sir.
if those things are defined by you, then definitely yes, you could consider that date is consists of 3 parts. But if we don't define the data type by ourselves, if we use system data type which is date itself, then we don't have any part. Understand?
Yes, sir.
Okay, the next part is single value multi-valued attribute. For an example, how many email address you could have? How many email address you can have?
So more than one.
It can be 0 or more than 1, right?
Yes,
That's
sir.
why this attribute is known as multi-valued attribute. Where you can have more than one value is known as multi-valued attribute. For an example, can you give any more example? A student that for a student that is something some attribute that could have multi-value.
Sir, phone numbers.
Phone numbers, very good. Phone numbers could be multi-valued. Anything else? Like hobbies, skills, degrees, so experience. So these could be all multi-valued attribute. Okay. The last part, stored versus derived attribute. So derived attribute are some attribute that is be calculated from some related attribute. Can you name an attribute that can be calculated from a related attribute? For student, something that need to be calculated. For student, do you think
Sir, how many courses he or she enroll?
number of credits? Very good. CGPA, number of credits, those are all derived attributes for the student. Okay, so this part is clear. Different types of attribute. Any question? Do you have any question?
So can you give another example of first one? Simple attribute.
Simple versus composite. Simple is your ID that has only one value. only one part. But your name, whenever I will be telling you name, you will say that, okay, my first name or last name or my nickname. Name is different part. If you think about your address, if I ask you your address, you will be saying, okay, which road, which house, which flat, which area, which zip number, which country. So they are different segments or different composition. So these are all composite attribute.
Okay, sir. Thank
So an entity can be defined in this way. So if you look carefully, the name of the entity is an uppercase. The name of the entity is in uppercase. Then we have to have the attribute. If it is an identifier is what? What is an identifier? That can identify an entity. For an example, for student, what is the identifier?
For student, it would be ID.
ID number.
Very good. For course,
For course, the course ID,
very
CSE
good.
303.
Very good. Very good. For faculty member,
It would be faculty ID, I guess.
it could be some faculty ID, very good, or employee ID, very good. So identifier should be underlined. Partial identifier is double line. Optional would be as it is. That means anything that is there, any other attribute which is not any defined type, that would be as is, normal. If it is a derived attribute, what is a derived attribute? Like CGPA, right? You have mentioned CGPA, number of credits, number of courses taken. Those are all derived attributes. Those should be under third bracket or square bracket. If we have multiple attribute like skill, telephone number, mobile number, email address, if you think there is a chance of having multiple attribute, you have to put that in curly bracket, second bracket. And if you have composite attribute, you have to put in first bracket. Okay, so these are three different types of special attribute, normal attribute, identifier, and partial identifier. So these are the types of attribute that we can have for an entity. I already have covered this part. Here the example is given. A composite attribute, as you can see, employee address is a composite attribute, and the components are street address, city, state, postal code. So these are the part. If you want, you can have road number, house number, flat number. You can also add those things in the address. Make sense? So first of all, we have to write employee address, that means the name of the attribute. Then in first bracket, we have to put the components. Make sense? Make sense? Can you go to the next slide?
you. Yes, sir.
Okay, so an identifier is, as you can see, underlined. Student ID is underlined as identifier. So identifier can be even composite. For example, here you can see flight ID is the identifier which contain flight number and date. These two is a composite attribute, but this is an at the same time identifier. So this is known as composite identifier. Here we have multi-word attribute. For example, skill is multi-word attribute. That's why skill is in curly bracket. And derived attribute is employee years employed. How many years the employee is working for the company. So that is an derived attribute, because that would be derived from where? Can anyone mention? From where I can found employee?
From the day
Sorry?
he joined till the day current date.
Very good. So here, as you can see, the fourth attribute, date employed. Date employed, from date employed, we can get the year employed. Very good. So these are some criteria for selecting identifier. Which one could be my identifier? So identifier could be that will basically the value that won't never change. For an example, for student, the ID don't change. Name changes. Do you change your name?
No, it doesn't.
Sorry, you don't.
The name doesn't change,
Sometimes
but
we do. Sometimes we do. If people don't like their name, they can do affidavit and they can change their name. The women after marriage, sometimes they change their last name.
all right,
Okay.
right. Yeah.
So yes, we can change the name, but the ID would never change. So that is one of the criteria for the identifier. So that should be valid value and it will never be null. And there should not be any intelligent identifier should not be used. And definitely there should be should be single attribute surrogate identifier. Maybe for large composite identifier can be used. So the naming of the attribute, the name should be singular and noun phrases should be used. For example, customer ID, age, product, minimum price, or major. So these are noun phrases should be used. Singular noun phrases should be used for attributes. It can't be plural. Similarly, the entity type should not be plural. So these are the guidelines. You can go through the guidelines by yourself. Let me get to the next important part. So far in this lecture, we have covered what is entity. As we have mentioned, entity is basically, what is entity? Can you remember? Can you tell me? Entity is a person, place, or object for which organization wants to collect data for. Something that we want to store data for is our entity. Okay. And whatever describe entity, something that describe entity is our
Attribute.
attribute. Very good. So attribute, how many types of attributes are there? We have seen many types. Attribute could be identifier. Attribute could be, no. Attribute could be identifier, right? Attribute could be partial identifier. Attribute could be composite. Attribute could be optional. Attribute could be derived. Attribute could be multi-value. So these are 6 types of attribute we have talked about. How many types of entities are there?
So 3 types.
What are those?
So strong, weak, acid.
Very good. Very good. So now let's go to the next slide, next presentation slide, where we will try.
Before you go, could you like repeat what was the partial identifier?
I will come back to partial identifier little late. Okay. I will
Okay.
explain that. I remember I have missed that one. I will explain that later.
Okay.
Okay, so here we are talking about relationship and relationship instances. As you can see, whenever we are talking about entity should be connected with one entity, should be connected with multiple entity. For an example, in this case, you can see employee completes courses. So employee is completing courses. Okay, so this is the relationship between employee and courses. Now here we are having multiple instances. For example, in employee, we have Chain as employee instance. We have Milton is another employee, Richie, Kelko, and Gosling. So we have multiple employees. Okay, and on the right side we have multiple courses. We have multiple students, we have multiple courses. So this is our courses. We have SQL, we have C++, Java, COBOL, Visual Basic, Perl, so far. These are the courses. Now you can see Chain has done how many courses?
2 courses.
Which courses Chain has completed?
C++, Java,
Very good. Melton?
C++, COBOL, Perl.
Okay, so Melton has done 3 courses, right? So we can see employees should be completing different courses and course should be completed by employees. So both sides we have relationship. Okay, so these lines, each of these lines represent a relationship. Make sense? Now, how can we define this relationship? So to understand relationship, first of all, we have to talk about the degree of relationship. In degree, it means how many entities are participating. Can you tell me here how many entities are participating in this relationship? In this employee completes course, how many relationships, how many
One,
participating in this relationship?
one, sir.
Sorry, one. What is the name? Which entity has participated?
Employee.
Employee, only one entity you can see.
Employee and course.
Sorry?
Course.
Very good. I can see employee and course. We have employee and we have course. Very good. So how many entity has participated in this relationship?
2.
Two. So when two entity participate, this relationship is known as binary relationship. When two employee participate, such relationship is known as binary relationship. Binary means two. Unary means
Single.
single, only one entity should be there. And ternary?
More than 2.
Ternary is basically 3. Ternary is basically 3. So these are the 3 possible degree of relationship. That means there could be only one entity, 2 entity, or 3 entity could be participating in the relationship. It can't be more than 3. Okay?
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So this is basically how we define the relationship. If it is 1, then you can see this part is 1 unary relationship. The bottom one is binary relationship, and this right part is ternary relationship. 3 entities are there, 3 boxes. Okay, this is how we define the relationship degree. So the example of unary relationship: person is married to a person. A person is married to a person. So this is basically a unary relationship. Employee manages employee. This is also a unary relationship. Team stands after team. That is also a unary relationship. All these 3 are example of unary relationship. Now here you can see that they have used, there are 2 different types of things has been used here. One is one-to-one, another is one-to-many. Can you see that? The first one is one-to-one, second one is one-to-many, third one is one-to-one. Okay. So what does that mean?
So if entity type is same.
Okay, let me explain from here. Okay, if an employee is associated with only one instance of course, one and only one, then it would be known as one. Similarly, if course is associated with only one employee, then it would be known as one from course side as well. So in this case, for this case, one employee can enroll to how many courses? One or many?
Many.
Many. In a single course, how many employee can be there? One or many?
Many, sir.
Many.
Many. So from both sides, the answer is many to many, right?
Yes.
So
Yes,
this
sir.
relationship would be known as many to many relation. This relation would be known as many to many relation. Now coming
But
back
sir,
here,
many to many. But sir, many to many. But there are how many degrees are there? Urinary.
unary. Unary का नाम बेटा, ওটা কি unary? Is it unary?
No sir.
Theater.
It is
What
sir,
is it?
binary.
Binary. Very good. So now let's talk about the unary relationship. One person is married to how many person? In Typical normal environment. One person
One
married to
person.
how many person?
1 to 1.
It is to one person, and that person is also married to the other person. So male is married to a female, and female is married to a male. So one person is married to one, and one is married to one from this side. That is why this is 1 to 1. Think about employee managers. One employee, the employee that manage. Who is the person called managing the employee? Who is managing?
Sir, manager.
Very good. So the employee who is managing is manager, and the other, they are also employee. They are staff, normal staff, sales executive or executives. So a manager is managing how many employees?
Sir, many.
Very good. That's the reason why you can see on top there is a many sign. So this sign is known as many. And one employee or one staff would be managed by how many managers?
One.
One. That's the reason why it is 1 to many. One manager managing many employee, but one employee is managed by one manager. So this is why this is known as 1 to many. Now think about another relationship as unary. Course is prerequisite of course. Okay. Can you follow this one?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Course is prerequisite of a course, right? Tell me what kind of relation should be this one? For a course, how many prerequisites could be there?
Many, sir.
Many. Very good. So for one course, there could be many prerequisites. A single course can be prerequisite of how many courses?
Sir, many.
Many. So the relationship is what type of relationship?
Many to many.
Very good. So these kind of thing are known as cardinality. 1 to 1, 1 to many, many to many. These three are different types of cardinality. Clear? These things are known as cardinality. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now let's talk about binary. Employee is assigned with a park space. In a university or in a particular institute, when one employee is given to one parking spot, one employee is given a single parking spot, then basically the relationship would be 1 to 1. One employee is assigned to a parking spot. In that parking spot, how many employees can park their car?
Sorry, sir.
In a single parking space, how many employees can park their car?
1.
One, sir.
One. If it is already assigned, mark it at IUB. If you have gone to basement 1, you can see there is a allocation for the vice chancellor, pro vice chancellor. So those places are only for VC and pro VC. So these are assigned parking space. So one employee has one parking space, and one parking space belongs to one
One
employee. So
Employee.
this is why the relationship is 1 to 1. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
This one student can register for how many courses? Many courses, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And a single course can have how many students?
Many.
Many students. So the relationship is
Many to many.
many to many. Product line contains product. That means from a production line, how many product can be produced? From one production line, how many product can be produced? Many product can be produced from a production line, but one product should be coming from how many product line?
One.
One. That's why this is 1 to many.
But sir, I have a question. Sir,
Go
how
ahead.
identify which one is binary or unary?
So tell me, what are these relationships?
Sir,
Unary or binary?
so this type of relationship is called binary relationship, but
Why?
স্যার এখানে কি ইনস্ট্যান্ট দুইটার জন্য দুটো ডিফারেন্ট
If
টাইপ ইনস্ট্যান্স
do I know about anything about instances? Degree depends on entity type, not instance. Okay.
ওকে স্যার আই গট ইট
Single entity. So here you can see there are double entity. Two entities are participating. Two entity. Employee parking space. That's why binary. Product
Yes,
line
yes.
product binary. Student course binary. Okay. So here we have an example of part, vendor, and warehouse. So this is a ternary relationship where we have part, vendor, and warehouse. So one vendor, one part supplies to multiple warehouse. So this is a many. Three side we have many. The relationship name is supplies. So this is an example of ternary relationship where we have how many entities?
So three entity.
Three entities. Very good. So these are three different types of cardinality: one to one, one to many, many to many. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Is there any doubt on this part? Okay. Now let's move to the cardinality constraint. This is the
স্যার একটা কোশ্চেন ছিল স্যার টার্সিয়ারি যেটা ছিল ওটাতে স্যার মেনি টু মেনি অনলি ওখানে কার্ডিনালিটি চেঞ্জ হতে পারে না মানে অন টু ওয়ান অর অন টু মেনি অনলি
so
মেনি
cardinality in case of ternary, in case of ternary, it should be like you have to ask question, putting these two as one, what should be the participation on the third one? That is one vendor, one part supplies to how many warehouse? One vendor, one part can be supplied to how many warehouse? If it is one, you say one. If it is many, you say many. Okay, it depends on the business case.
ওকে স্যার ওকে থ্যাংক ইউ আই গট পয়েন্ট
So the next point is cardinality constant. Cardinality constant where we measure is there any participation mandatory for the relationship or it is not mandatory for the relationship. That means if there is any mandatory relationship or there is any optional relationship. If it is a mandatory, we say 1. If it is optional, we say 0. Here there is an example. We mentioned mandatory one. Mandatory one is denoted as the first part. The first part is mandatory. The second part is one. Okay. Mandatory one. This is how the relationship is shown. Mandatory one. Here we can see optional one. That means 0 is optional. 1 is 1. Here we have mandatory many. 1 is mandatory and this is many sign. This is many sign. Similarly, we have optional, that is 0 followed by many sign. This is optional. Now, what exactly this refer, let me explain from here. A patient, if you are a patient, you must have a patient history, isn't it?
ইয়েস স্যার
Without a history, can anyone be a patient?
Yes, sir.
হতে পারে এটা যে you are a patient but you don't have any history. Can that happen?
স্যার যে ফার্স্ট টাইম পেশেন্ট হয়ে তার তো হিস্ট্রি থাকবে না ইজন্ট ইট
Sorry. বুঝিনি, আসিয়া কি বললেন?
স্যার যে ফার্স্ট টাইম মানে যে ফার্স্ট টাইম ডক্টর দেখাতে আসছে তার তো হিস্ট্রি থাকবে না পেশেন্ট হিস্ট্রি রাইট
I am not talking about entry, I am talking about history. Whether that has been entered in the system or not, that is none of my business. So whenever you are going to a doctor, you are going to a doctor because you have a history, because you are ill, you are suffering. That's why you are going to the doctor.
Doctor.
Make sense?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
বুঝতে পেরেছেন? আপনি ডাক্তারের কাছে যাবেন তো আপনার প্রবলেম হয়েছে বোধহয়, নাহলে তো আপনি যাবেন না। So you have a history. That's why you are going to the doctor. So this is mandatory. That's why a patient must have a patient history.
Patient history. Yes, sir.
Similarly, a patient history belongs to whom? A patient history belongs to whom?
Sir, patient.
Patient. So is it possible for a patient history not belonging to any patient? Can that happen?
Sir, no.
No. So definitely each history belongs to a patient. Okay?
Yes, sir.
So this is mandatory from both sides, as you can see. The relationship is mandatory from both sides. The next part, employee project. So here I can see all employees might not be assigned to a project. All employees might not be assigned to a project. That means there could be employees who haven't been assigned to any project. That's why you can see the optional is there. Here, as you can see, Pete and Heidi, they are not assigned to any project. Can you see the name and the relationship? Pete and Heidi, they are not assigned to any project, but they are employee. Okay?
Yes, sir.
So that's why this is for employee, project is optional. But think about a project. Can a project be employeeless?
No, sir.
No, sir.
No, that's why for a project, employee is mandatory. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now think about person is married to a person. So can this happen that someone is deciding that they won't be getting married? So if that is true, then optional could be there from both sides. A woman can decide not to get married. Similarly, a male can decide not to get married. So from both sides, it could be optional. Make sense?
Sir, can you give me another example?
Another example. Example of what?
Sir, mandatory optional and optional both.
Sorry?
Sir,
Virginia.
mandatory and optional
Eh.
as well as optional and optional. I need
No. Don't mention about mandatory, optional, mandatory in this way. This would be either mandatory one, optional one, mandatory many, optional many. We don't say mandatory optional. We will never say mandatory optional together. Okay. The relationship should be either mandatory one, mandatory many, optional one, optional many. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So this is an example of unary many to many, where an item has a component which is again an item. So one item can have multiple components, and one component can be component of multiple items. That's why this is many to many relationship. Okay. So course prerequisite. I believe we have mentioned this part, right? আমরা বলেছিলাম না, we have mentioned that one as well, right?
Yes, sir. বলছিলেন।
Okay. So this is what is this?
Sir, compositive value versus relationship.
Right. So this one, this particular relationship, this particular chart is showing if we have multiple attribute in a particular entity, how can we get rid of that? multi-valued attribute. As you can see, prerequisite is a multi-valued attribute, right? Prerequisite is a multi-valued attribute. How can we define that in relation? So in case of multi-valued attribute, we have to create an entity. Multi-valued attribute should be shift to a entity, and we have to assign a relationship with the entity itself. As you can see here, one course can have multiple course as prerequisite. Okay, one course has multiple course as prerequisite, and in this case you can see we are talking about skills. One employee can have multiple skills. One employee can have multiple skills. Here you can see we have done the relationship in this way. Employee possess skill, where skill contains skill code and skill type, skill title. These are all skill. But when we are relating that with employee, since it is multiple attribute, we mention this is possess. And here we have employee ID and skill code. Then these two is combining these two is our primary key in this relation.
Sir,
Okay.
PK means primary key.
PK means primary key, SK means foreign key. Okay, PK means primary key, right? So this is basically how we deal with different types of composite attribute. And now let's move into something very important.
Sir,
Here we have,
before
sorry,
you go, could you go back 2 slides, like
this one,
back again,
this one.
back again. Yeah, here, no, after that, yeah, here you can see like there are two like relations, like it's showing like two ways it's showing, like has prerequisite is prerequisite for, like could you like explain that again, please? Like one to one and one to many, or like do
As
you
I have,
understand?
as very good. So as I have mentioned earlier, one course can have multiple course as prerequisite, right?
Yes, sir.
But one course, one prerequisite course is a prerequisite for how many courses? Multiple courses.
One course, multiple.
A prerequisite course can be prerequisite of how many courses?
Multiple courses, sir.
Multiple courses. The first one is saying has prerequisite, multiple prerequisite, and is prerequisite for multiple.
Do
So
we have
first
to
one,
show
one course.
one
One example.
every time?
Sorry.
When we like do our own entity diagram ERD, do we have to show both of the relationships?
Yes, definitely. There could be multiple relationship between two entities. You have to show all those relationships.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
Excuse me, sir. Sir,
Yes.
why do we have here dash line representing the relationship? Why don't we have a straight line?
Okay. So this one is we typically there are two ways of doing the. I believe like let me go back. I don't remember whether this is there here. As you can see, we have dash dotted line. Can you see the dotted line here?
Yes, sir.
So this is not relationship. This is means these attributes belong to this relationship. So the relationship is the solid part. Solid part is the relationship. Dotted line is the attribute. These are the attribute of the relationship. Okay. So that's the reason why whenever we are defining the attribute, here I can see prerequisite is the attribute, right?
Yes, sir.
Prerequisite is attribute of what? Course. So
Course,
when
yeah.
we define attribute of course as a new relation or as a new entity, we give dotted line because this is not relation. This is what? This is attribute, right?
Yes, yes, sir.
So that's the reason why it is not solid line. It is dashed line. Khadija, is it clear?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
So here you can see, but in this is a unique case. As you can see, skill is an attribute of employee. But here you can see the solid line is there, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Now, why this is solid? Because this was like sometimes when we are drawing the ER diagram, we might be sloppy and we can make mistakes. So here what happened, skill could be defined as an attribute. Instead of doing so, they put skill inside employee. For example, can I say course is an attribute of student? Can I say that?
Yes.
If I say yes, if you say yes, then I can, if I say that, then it will be a mistake because we know course can identify itself by course ID. Course has course ID, course has course name, course has credit, isn't it? So something that can identify itself, can that be an attribute? Are you there? Can you follow me?
Yes, sir.
Following? Something that has a unique code, skill type is there. Even though I'm saying skill is attribute, can I say that? The answer is yes, I can say that, but that is not right. Or if it is right, but it is not actually an attribute because this has independent attributes like skills, title, and type. That's why we have formed a, what we have formed? We have formed a additional entity for skill. But in this case, prerequisite, whether we have any ID, do we have any ID? Answer is no. Is there any name? Answer is no. There is nothing. But here you can see when we have mentioned about prerequisite, we provide an ID. This ID is coming from where? Course ID is coming from where? From course. Course ID is coming from course. Prerequisite ID is coming from where? That is also coming from course. That is the reason why we are having the dash line, because prerequisite doesn't have any attribute here, any additional attribute. The attribute is course ID that is going there. This is why this is dashed line. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Now, as we are mentioning, like we want to discuss something very important here, which is time dependent data. So think about it. The price of a pen, let's say today is 10 taka. After 10 days, it could be 11 taka or 12 taka. It is a changing figure, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Now, if you develop a software for a stationery shop, if you develop a stationery shop software and you keep the date and you keep the item and the price of the item, when the change occur, what you will do? কি করবেন? You will change the price, right?
Yes, sir.
So if I change the price and I tell you total 300 pieces of pen I have sold last month and current price of pen is 10 taka, how much I gain by selling pens? Any answer?
Could you repeat what you said, sir?
The question is, I am selling 300 pin each with 10 taka in last month. What is the total revenue that has been earned by selling the pens?
3,000. 3,000.
Answer is wrong. Any doubt why the answer is wrong? $300 pens price is 10 taka. 300 pens has been sold in last month. Current price is 10 taka. The answer was given 3,000 and I'm saying the answer is wrong. Why? Did I mention that all the pens have been sold with 10 taka?
No, sir.
What I have mentioned? I mentioned the current price is 10 taka, right?
Yes, sir.
Current price of the pen is 10 taka and I have sold 300 pen in the last month. Last month a price koto chilo? Do I know that? Have I told you?
No, sir, not yet.
Not yet. Then how could you say 3,000? So these are some problem of price, because the price can get changed and you always need to keep the updated price, right? That's why they found a way of having price as multiple attribute which will contain the price and effective date. So from when the price has been this price, the effective date should be there and price should be there and multiple entry could be there. So now if you think in this way, you can see maybe 100 out of 300 pin, 100 can be sold with 5 taka, the next 100 could be sold with 7 taka and next 100 could be sold by 10 taka. So in total 100 with 50, 100 with 70 and 100 with 10. So this is the total revenue. So when I can get that? If I have the effective date. If I have an effective date, then from when to when that effective date was there, within that date, whatever the product was sold with that price, I know the price. Okay, so these are some very important concepts that you need to understand. If you have price, this kind of information, then it would be better for you to have effective date with the price. Can I go to the next slide?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So here we are talking about we are describing the basically the how things are associated. So employees are, as we have mentioned like previously, one particular entity could have multiple participation in the relationship. For example, in this one employee is supervising many employee, that means as supervisor or as manager he is managing employee. One employee belongs to the department, he works for the department. One employee is working for one department has multiple workers. Same time, one employee is managing the department, the employee who is managing the department is manager, one employee is managing one department. Same time, one department is managed by only one employee who is managing the department. So this is one to one, but this one is one to many. So there are multiple relationship among the entities and we all need to understand those complexity of the relationship. So now the question become associative entity. What is associative entity and how that would be used in the relationship diagram? Now, as you can see in this particular relation, this was basically taken from the very beginning. We have employee, we have courses. One employee would be completing multiple courses. One course can be completed by multiple students. So we have many-to-many relationship. So when we have many-to-many relationship, we need to complete, we need an attribute when the course was completed. When the course was completed. Please very carefully, this date completed is an attribute. Is it an attribute or it is an entity? What is it? Date completed.
Date is an attribute.
It's attribute, sir.
Attribute.
Why? How can you understand this is an attribute?
Because dash
Dash
line.
line.
Very good. Dash line and there is something else.
It doesn't have a primary key.
Whenever we will be having an entity name should be given, which should be in uppercase. As you can see in employee is in uppercase, course is in uppercase. Then we have the attribute. Here we only have attribute. There is no entity name. That is the reason we can consider this is attribute. There is no entity. Similarly, this particular diagram can be represented in the following way, where we can say employee certificate courses, where certificate is nothing but an associative entity. This is the relationship between the entity. How one employee is getting multiple certificate for the courses, and one certificate belongs to how many employees? One certificate can be given to how many employees?
One.
On the other side, you can see one courses could offer how many certificate? Multiple certificate. One course can offer multiple certificate, but one certificate should mention of how many courses? Should mention only one courses. This is how the many-to-many relationship can be converted to one-to-many relation with an associative entity. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is basically our second lecture on this task. Let us take a break for 10 to 15 minutes, and we will come back to the next class after the break.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
স্যার রিপোর্টটা কি সব গ্রুপ মেম্বারদের সাবমিট করা লাগবে?
Sorry, reporter.